Hello and welcome to my live. Today I am talking about my three greatest failures and how they led to me making $900,000 plus in my business. Now, I know that sounds like a crazy title, but it is something that people ask me about all the time is Monica, when have you been disappointed? When have you failed? And frankly, I think that we don't talk about it enough in our industry. You know, things like Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, they're all about how well you see people crying, but they're only crying about their awesome successes. And people don't really talk about what it feels like to fall down. And today I want to do just that because if there is one thing that I know is true in business, is that there are expansions and there are contractions, which means that there are going to be days, weeks, months, and years that go really well, and days, weeks, months, and years where there's a contraction, where it doesn't go as well as you want, or where you're experimenting with something and it doesn't quite go as planned. All right. So, first, I want to say hello to Sarah and Kate and Jen. And Tabisha, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here with me. And if you're watching this on replay, please put watched replay in the comments. I tell you, you guys, there's nothing that makes me happier than to find out that people are watching this. Please comment. Tell me what you took from this. Tell me what you liked, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching the replay. It just really, really warms my heart. So I'm reading David Goggins' second book. Now, if you haven't read David Goggins' books, they're what I call warrior books. They're all about how to bring up that action taking warrior side of you and get yourself going. In fact, David Goggins says that he is en route to being the baddest motherfucker, as he would call it, excuse my French, on the planet. Now, I was so intrigued because he tells this amazing story about how he's running his first 240-mile race. So he's on the track, on the race, pathway, and he gets to, I think, about 130 miles into the race. And then they keep running, and he's got a pacer with him for this particular part of the race. And they're running and they're running. They're following somebody else's footsteps. And then he starts to realize that something's wrong. And he realizes that they've run 15 miles off course, 15 miles off the pathway. Now, the thing is that he has got all kinds of health issues going on, so he's in a lot of pain. But the other thing that starts to happen is that he is on a thyroid medication, and he thought he was going to get his thyroid medication at the next stop. And now, because they've taken all this time out of the race, he's unable to get to his thyroid medication in time. So by the time they get to the next place where his team is, where he can take his thyroid medication, he's completely exhausted. His body has no energy whatsoever. He ends up having to sit out from the race for about 12 hours, and he was in the top 4. He drops to number 80 in the race. Now, for most of us, that kind of disappointment would be so unsettling. And for most of us, we might just drop out of the race or assume that we couldn't go further. What I love about what David Goggins says is he says that he gets back, after the resting for 12 hours, he gets back in the race. Now he's like something like in the 80s. And he does not give up. Instead, he doesn't even let the mental chatter get to him at all. There's, always that sort of like those voices that are kind of begging to come in, that are like, oh my gosh, are you just going to quit the race altogether? Are you not going to be able to do this anymore? What's now you're number 80 and he was number 4 when he dropped out of the race. It wasn't even his fault, right? It was the fault of one of his pacers. And all these voices are going through his head. And he pushes them away. And instead, he does something remarkable. He starts making a plan for doing this race 12 months later. he immediately starts going into the bigger picture of what can he do in the moment. And he decides in that moment that he's going to run the race again and that he's going to use every mile that he's running now to track the path, to research it, to study it, and to start making a plan so that he can come back and be in the top 5 for the next year. And that just, my friends, is one of the most powerful lessons about failure is that number one, whenever something does not go your way, there's going to be all these voices that come in and start chattering to you. And the most important thing is, are you going to focus on the failure voices, the shame voices, the disappointment voices? Or are you in the moment going to make a plan to do the thing, do the next thing, take action for what is next without letting those voices in? Now, I want to talk about how this affects us as entrepreneurs. For me, one of my biggest failures happened when I was doing one of my 3-day events. So I've been doing 3-day events for 10 years now, since 2012. And I love doing them, and they've brought my business great success. In fact, one of the parts of our Rise methodology that we teach in our Rise Business Academy, which is all about raising your income, your spiritual connection, and your energy. One of the pieces on raising your income is that the highest level, the most effective activity that you can do in your business is speaking, getting in front of people, either virtually or in person, so that people can get to know you and connect with you. And then through that speaking, they can set up conversations with you, connections with you, and become your clients. And in fact, speaking is one of the highest leverage activities that you can do in your business. Now, I had hired a new event company for my 3-day event. And from the very first meeting, I sensed that something was off. It was a huge red flag. They weren't listening to me. I didn't feel respected in the meeting. I felt like I was sort of a second-class citizen, but I didn't really listen to my gut on what was going on. So I just kept going. And what was sad and scary about that is that as we were going through the meetings leading up to the event, things kept getting worse and worse. And I remember talking to my husband about it, and he was like, "Oh, Monica, you should say something. You should just tell them that you want to find another event company, pay whatever needs to be paid, and leave." And I just didn't want to do that because I didn't want to stop, even though I knew there was something wrong. And that, my friends, is lesson 1. When you know something is wrong, believe it. Believe yourself. And don't be afraid to pay the money or waste the time in order to get out of a relationship that isn't working. Because most likely what has happened is not going to get better. So then we get to the 3-day event. And everything was really disorganized at the event. I didn't feel like people didn't, the event team didn't really know the production schedule. I felt like our speakers weren't being very well taken care of. And it just felt like everything was kind of a mess behind the scenes. And I spent a lot of my energy taking care of people off stage. Now, thankfully, the on-stage performance was good, but I was definitely not my full self. And when we got to sales that year, I had spent about $75,000 on the event. And when we got to the conversion, the place where we're looking at sales, we typically closed, anywhere from 25 to 30 new clients. And we only closed about 12 new clients that year. So it was devastating, given that all well in, I would have spent $110,000 in at least 4 to 6 months, of planning and organizing on that event. Now, again, thinking back to David Goggins, one of the most important things that I did after that event was I went home and I figured out, okay, what's next here? What can I learn from this event? What can I learn from this experience? And what does my future look like? Well, I turned around and I planned a second event that year. And I wasn't planning on doing 3-day events that year, but I planned a second one in September in New York, which would be slightly easier to do because I live in New York. Uh, Mainly because I knew that I needed to A, get back on the horse again and keep going, but B, I needed to take everything that I had learned from this particular failure and turn it around, right? And think long term and strategically about it. For so many entrepreneurs that I meet, you don't look at a failure as something to do over again. You look at a failure as a reason to hide, put your head in the sand and not do it ever again. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is not putting yourself back in that position and learning the lessons that you learned from it instead of counting yourself out. I see so many people that do launches and they don't hit their numbers in their launches, and their response to that is to never do a launch again. So, first lesson, right? Review here. Listen to yourself. When you know something is wrong, let yourself out of it. Second lesson, when something really tanks, right? You have a train wreck, you lose a bunch of money, you lose a bunch of time, you lose self esteem. The most important piece is that you look into the future and you keep taking actions. You do not allow yourself to put your head in the sand. Now, that September event that we did was one of the most successful events. It was a tiny event. There's only 60 people in the room. We ended up, it was one of our most profitable events. We ended up closing 15 high level clients. It was about $350,000 of revenue from that event. And the lessons that I took from that bombing not only led to that $300,000 of revenue at that event, but it led to a seven-figure event in the next year. The key is, folks, is when things don't go your way, do not assume that the lesson is to take yourself out, and do not allow yourself to sit on the couch. This is what I love about David Goggins' story, is that he got back on the race. He knew he was number 84. He knew he wasn't going to be in the top 10. And he did not even allow himself to have one moment of quitting. Instead, he immediately just changed his expectations. New expectations. Instead of coming in the top 10 in this race, I'm going to come in the top 10 next year. And for me, that is how I started to really turn that failure of an event into success for the next one. I just changed the expectations. Instead of expecting that particular event was going to be successful, I said, okay, this event's not going to do it. We didn't hit our numbers at this event. So my expectation is that we're going to do it at the next event. And we're going to take everything we've learned and we're going to implement it, reflect on it, change it over the next 6 months and make the next events better. And that is what we did. The other thing to keep in mind, and so a couple like practical lessons for those of you that are doing events that we learned about that first event. Number one, make sure that you're hiring an event team that is actually at your that you're doing production meetings before your event. And a production meeting is when you're going through all the different things that are going to be happening at the event, and make sure that the event team that is at the production meetings is the actual event team that's going to be at your event. I know for us, I know it seems simple, but for us, because there were different people at our production meetings and at the event, we were surprised by that, and it made for a lot of confusion during the event. Number two, at an event, make sure that the people that you are doing enough interaction at an event, Q&A, answering questions, asking people to come to the mic, doing games, walking out in the crowd, chatting with people, that people get a chance to get to know you. At the event that I did not do so well at, I was so stressed out that people didn't get a chance to really see, feel, and experience the real Monica. And at the future events, when we did a lot more of that, we did a lot better, both in terms of how the event felt and the conversion and the revenue that we generated from it. And number three, make sure that when you're teaching the content of your event, that you're not just telling people the information that they need to know, do this, do that, do this, but you're also giving them context. You're giving them the why of why it's important. Again, I learned from the event that didn't do well, because I was so nervous and a little bit worked up, I had this tendency to just go straight into teaching Monica. And while that's great, and I'm a good teacher, if people don't understand your why of why that content is important, they can tend, to fall out of paying attention. So those are the 3 lessons we had learned, and we took those lessons and I turned them into well over $900,000 at the next 2 events. And that is the key. Now, I do want you to understand one thing. People will say all the time, like, I feel like there's all kinds of stories about, even this one that I'm telling you, it might sound like, oh, I had this bomb of an event. And then all I did is come home and learn my lessons. And then we were good. I don't want that to appear that way because that's just bullshit. I do want you to know that I had my tantrums. I had my moments where I was just on my knees, right? I came home, I did a lot of crying, and I actually did something that I highly recommend after disappointment, which is that I took 2 weeks completely off work. Not right away, right? I got home, learned my lessons, organized the business, wrote everything down, crafted what we needed to do differently. And then about 4 weeks later, I took 2 weeks and I actually went to San Diego and I went to a raw food retreat and just completely didn't even think about work. And and if you know me at all, you know that I was in real dire straits if I was actually at a raw food retreat. But doing that allowed me to rest, recover, and it also allowed me to look at things from my higher perspective, from my higher self, and really look at, okay, it's not everything's crumbling. It's just that we need to make some changes. So it's another learning here is know that you have to feel your feelings. It's not like whenever you have a disappointment or a failure, it is not going to feel good. But the good news is that you can survive it. You can survive disappointment. You can survive the low, harder feelings. You can survive the things that are not making you feel great. And the beauty of that, of surviving all of that, is that you can stop being afraid. You can stop being afraid of failure. You can stop being afraid of disappointment because you know that you can feel it. The key is you just have to make the space to feel that sadness, to feel that grief whenever there is a disappointment or a failure along the way. All right, my friends, I hope that this gives you some explanation of resilience and building that resilience, right? Remembering, number one, trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to waste money, waste time, and cut the cord on anything that's not working. Number two, make sure that as soon as a disappointment or failure happens, that you feel it for sure. But then after you feel it, you look at what is the long term? How can I change the expectations? How can I take the pressure off of myself so that I can do that next thing and start thinking about what's going to happen 12 months from now, what's going to happen 15 months from now, now that you've had this experience so that you can immediately start taking action on the next thing. And number three, don't forget to learn the lessons of what didn't work and put them into play for the next time around. Thank you so much. I will be back here every Thursday at 5:00 sharing teaching. Please take a moment and leave me a comment. Let me know you watched this, even if it's the replay. It would make my heart sing to know what you got out of this, or even just that you watched it, just because you know how hard it is to just stare at that green button. I'm sending you all so much love. And of course, leave me a comment if there's something that you want me to do a live about. I'm happy to do that. Mwah. Bye, everyone.